Steve Brooks, is the toxic management culture revealed at Rotherham Council an extreme example of a general lack of effective accountability in local government?
Can I just ask you, are you generally thinking it's that whatever there was there that's been unearthed, that there's, because of the character that's revealed about Rotherham by the reports, suggests that kind of thing or other not unrelated things could happen elsewhere? Is that what is underlying your question?
Maybe not related things, but certainly a culture of bullying and unaccountability at the top, yes.
Thank you. Lisa Nandy.
So what happened in Rotherham is not just horrendous, but I think is getting worse the more that we learn about what did happen. And the report that came out recently was terrible. There were members of the Labour Party who were implicated in that, and I think it's absolutely right that the Cabinet has resigned, that the Police and Crime Commissioner has gone, and that the councillors who were involved were suspended. And I wanted to say that because I think wherever you find this sort of thing happening, it must be stopped and the individuals must be held to account. But what I worry about in terms of accountability is that the story, at least of the last 15 years since I first started working with children and young people, some of whom were in similar positions to some of the young people in Rotherham, is that across the country, in different towns and cities, we've seen the same story. And you can go all the way back to the death of Victoria Columbier and read every serious case review, every report into what's happened. And what you find is that although individuals may be held accountable, that systems aren't challenged. And I would say, Jonathan, that the biggest problem that we have in this country actually is about the ability of children and young people to feel empowered and able to speak up, and about the willingness of all of us, services and the public, to listen to those concerns and to act on them. And one thing that we would do in May, if we win the general election, straight away, is that we would bring in sex and relationships education into schools. And we've had a really hard time about this in the media over the last week. But I would just say that having worked with children and young people in that position, an astonishingly high proportion of boys and girls in this country don't even understand basic concepts like consent or what a good, healthy, strong relationship looks like. And if we don't give them the tools to speak up, then in 10 years' time, you'll have another crop of politicians sitting on this panel saying we need to learn the lessons, and it's just not good enough.
Two things, please. Two things, if I may, just on that. Is it, as is being said, is it from the age of 5 that you would, in one way or another, begin the process of education about these matters?
Yes, so we think it's absolutely right that we should be talking with 5-year-olds about how to respect their friends and what a good, healthy relationship looks like, how to speak up when you feel uncomfortable if somebody's doing something that you don't like, and about things like stranger danger that I was taught about. These are all things that happen in some schools but not in others, and we think that's dreadful. The suggestion, though, that we would be teaching 5-year-olds about the intricacies of sex is just absolute nonsense, and more than nonsense, actually. I think it's utterly irresponsible when we've had so many of these cases around the country.
And briefly, if you would, one other thing, the cabinet system, the cabinet within the council that Rotherham was, and obviously that's where the focus of the Casey report has been. That system was, I think, established by Labour. Is it something that needs to be looked at again as a structure which could bring about, to go back to our question I said, similar things elsewhere?
Yeah, I think there's a whole range of things that we should look like, and it goes back to the questioner's point about accountability. But what I would say is, having worked with social services over the years, I think there is a real issue about how we empower frontline social workers, because at the moment what we've got is a situation where individual social workers on the front line are accountable when things go wrong, but they're not empowered to make sure that they don't. And there's a real issue here, I think, about accountability that runs right from the very top of local authorities all the way down. And one of the things that we think needs to happen quite urgently is that we need to make sure that we bring back laws that Labour brought in after Victoria Columbier, so that all frontline professionals working with children have a duty to collaborate to keep children safe. They were removed under this government, but they need to be brought back.
Is Rotherham, do you think, Scott, an extreme example of a general lack of effective accountability in local government, as Steve Brooks asks?
Oh, it's a difficult subject, this one, isn't it? Because I think the politicians will avoid what is the root cause. I mean, we can talk about the local councillors and what they did wrong. We can talk about the people who work in social services and what they did wrong. But what actually happened in the community of Rotherham is what I'd like to know. What has changed in that town that has caused this to happen in the last, say, 10 years? And that's a really difficult subject that even I'm uncomfortable going into.
What are you uncomfortable about?
Well, we understand that these people are from Pakistani origin. So where does that take us, in that debate? I don't want to go there, I really don't, because I don't want to be the person on the panel taking us there. But, fundamentally, something's gone wrong in that community. Something has gone terribly wrong. OK, these people haven't done their job right, and they should have been sacked, not resigned. And they should be, at the general election, we should elect new councillors, the whole lot of them. Yeah, so that should be given over to the people of Rotherham, and that should happen. We shouldn't be waiting another year or so. It should happen now, while it's in the press, while it's in people's minds. Let's have a proper debate and find out what happened over there and what is happening in other towns around the country as well. Because if what you say is right, we need to know. And I fear for young people around the country, and I want it sorted as a member of the general public at the end of the day.
John Shapps.
So the Community Secretary, Eric Pickles, commissioned Louise Casey to do this report, which was the upshot of which is this week. And actually, when you read it, it literally brings tears to your eyes. It's one simple: vulnerable children being repeatedly failed by a council paralysed by complacency, institutionalised political correctness, and blatant failure of the political leadership, just exactly as Scott was saying. But the scale of this is incredible. 1,400 children subject to appalling abuse because there was a level of incompetence and political correctness which prevented them from getting into this. So the most immediate thing is Rotherham Council is going to have the appointed commissioners to run it. The reason there can't be immediate elections there is the whole council is so dysfunctional now that it literally needs to be taken by central government and run by commissioners for a year, and then after which point in 2016 there'll be elections to do exactly what you just talked about. But the other part of this, which hasn't been addressed, is the question of whether this extends to other councils or indeed other institutions or bodies or statutory institutions. And that is what we need to get to the bottom of, both historically and to know for today. And that's why we've set up this statutory inquiry led by Justice Lowell Goddard from New Zealand, from their High Court, who is now going to undertake an investigation which will have a statutory basis. That means, importantly, she will be able to require people to come and give evidence, and that is absolutely essential.
Given the scale
yes.
of what has been, does her remit include in looking at or being able to look at all councils and the way in which they operate, if there is from that council or from that area allegations which are made to her? I mean, it's covering the whole nation.
Yes, so there are a number of different councils which have already been
they've been identified already. Yes, but if a whole lot of others came along,
oh yes, absolutely. No, this has got to be a proper, comprehensive, independent panel inquiry, and
this could last longer than Chilcot, couldn't it?
I don't think it needs to be a nothing can last longer than Chilcot. I hope that's not the case, and because she'll have the power to require witnesses to attend, to give evidence, and because it will be professionally run, and because there's a need to get to the bottom of this, we shouldn't be living in a country where we just don't know the extent of it. Rotherham, things have clearly gone unbelievably wrong, and the details, when you read these two reports, one in August and one by Louise Casey, are just beyond horrendous. We need to get to the bottom of it, and that is what this appointment this week will do.
Maurice Scott Cato.
This is obviously a really terrible case, and I think what's most serious about it is the fact that we've failed some of the most vulnerable people in our communities, and in fact that there were significant pleas for help both from some of these girls themselves and from their families, and yet those pleas went unanswered. I think it's a serious failing of public services. It's a failing of the resources for social services within Rotherham Council, who were simply not able to do their job properly, I think partly because they were poorly resourced and poorly funded. I think the children's homes themselves The children's homes themselves were not adequately funded. I mean, as Green Party policy, we suggest having much smaller, genuine homes for children who need to live in care. And I think, obviously, that's more expensive, but we think it's something that children deserve. So it's a failure of the funding of public services on the one hand, but I think it's also a failure of democracy. And I think that's where the questioner was approaching this from, really. Because we see a lot of areas where the Labour Party is so dominant that actually there is no real challenge to their authority. There's a couple of councils in London
Sorry
now.
to hurry you along.
Yeah, okay. There's a couple of councils in London now where they're all Labour councillors except for one Green. And as a response to that, we would suggest a different way of electing councillors locally that's more like the Scottish system. So you have a proportional system, so you're bound to get a spread of councillors from different parties. We think this is what's needed to improve democratic accountability.
Thank you very much. And